Socrates, a very famous Greek philosopher from Athens, has rightly said that the only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. So the real knowledge comes when you realize that the knowledge which you have is not sufficient. So when you know that you know nothing, that is when you start learning, and that is when you become a knowledgeable person, and that is what the real wisdom means. And that is what these lines from Socrates means. See, you might ask this question now, that why all of a sudden I've started talking about knowledge. See, knowledge economy is an economy which is run on skills and the intellect of the people rather than the labor of the people. Indian economy is currently a knowledge economy, which is mostly run on not a tertiary basis, but quaternary and quinary type of economy. And if you know what is quaternary and quinary economy, these are knowledge economies on the basis of human capital formation and on the basis of human development in a country. Now, if knowledge is at the forefront, and knowledge is so important as a metric, then if you see all around yourself, are the people getting just skilled, trained, or are the people earning knowledge also? So there's a very big difference between getting knowledge and getting skilled or getting trained. Now, in the same line, the government of India has revived its 2021 plan recently to supplement GDP, gross domestic product, with a new metric. We call it as gross domestic knowledge product. That is GDKP, which is why we are talking about knowledge all of a sudden, because the government now thinks that alongside GDP, what we should calculate and what we shall calculate is GDKP, that is gross domestic knowledge product, basically to measure the impact of knowledge on economic and the social well-being of the society. So very recently, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has held a discussion in relation to formation of a conceptual framework for calculating this gross domestic knowledge framework or gross domestic knowledge production. And this GDKP, it will better reflect the contributions of innovators, the innovation contribution, the contribution of intellectual property, and the knowledge-driven sectors to the economic growth and economic development of the countries. And if that is the case, then GDKP is soon going to become a very important measure, a very important metric from which we'll be utilizing to ensure that the country is prosperous or not. So in today's session, we'll talk about GDP, GDKP, and why GDP is a flawed measure and why it is not a full-fledged measure, and what are the alternatives of GDP alongside gross domestic knowledge product, and all the other relevant things which we need to understand we'll be talking about in this particular session. Hello, my name is Preetpal Singh and all of you are watching Perspective. Now, when we talk about GDP, that is gross domestic product, firstly, it means that it is the gross value, that is the overall value, which includes depreciation, by the way. So it is the gross value of production. But what production? The production of final goods and services. So it's the gross value of production of final goods and services being produced within the domestic territory of a country in a financial year. So if I have to repeat what GDP actually means, it is basically the final goods and services being produced within the domestic territory of a country at a gross basis in a financial year in a country. That is what your GDP actually means. So while we calculate GDP, what is at the forefront? Goods and services. Now, many economists, they believe that rather than keeping goods and services at the forefront and keeping them as the real metric to understand that the economy is growing or not growing, let us have some alternative measures as well. Because many economists believe that GDP is not the right measure and it is not the absolute measure. It might be one of the good measures, but it can't measure the economic activity of the whole economy as a whole, which is why this gross domestic knowledge product is now a new measure to supplement the gross domestic product by capturing the contribution of knowledge-driven sectors in our economy and the contribution of innovation, intellectual properties in the economic and social well-being of our country and our economy. Now, the question which you might ask is that, sir, what is the need of this gross domestic knowledge product and what it is actually? Theoretically, it sounds really good, but in actuality, what does it mean? See, firstly, we need to understand the need. Now, in this era of rapid technological transformation, where artificial intelligence is coming up, robotics is at the forefront, machine learning is at the forefront, cloud computing is at the forefront, all of these things are tech-driven, plus knowledge-driven as well. And in such a scenario, traditional economic indicators like GDP or per capita income, they are not serving the purpose what they should, and they are not able to adequately address the need and scope of improvement in these knowledge-driven sectors. which is why there is a necessary requirement to ensure that there is a new metric which is developed which measures the output on the basis of these knowledge sectors. So basically, by this GDKP, what we want to do is we want to capture the value generated by intellectual property, the value generated by research, the value generated by innovation in our country, that how much value these things generate. And India has been experiencing lately a lot of growth in patents, in research, in software development, in artificial intelligence, in digital services, and a lot of spheres. India has been experiencing a lot of growth. And these knowledge-driven sectors, they are significantly contributing to the overall economic well-being of the people and the country. Now, for example, take your example. Before ChatGPT came into play, you were using simple Google searches to do your homework, to do your tasks. Now, after the advent of ChatGPT, those who are using it actively, their lifestyle has significantly improved, or at least their lives have become better by using artificial intelligence. Will that be measured by GDP? The answer is no. But will that be measured by GDKP? Probably yes. So, our lives getting better due to utilization of artificial intelligence, us getting better responses, faster responses, and our productivity increasing due to that, that is what is exactly would be measured in the gross domestic knowledge product. Of course, the whole conceptual construct is yet to be finalized, but still, these kind of things are the things which we can expect to be included in GDKP. So what actually we are doing is, we are moving ahead from the tangible goods and services which earlier we used to see, tangible goods and intangible services. From that we are moving to now knowledge. That is, we are moving towards knowledge creation, education, and a digital transformation as a whole. So basically a more realistic, a more futuristic, and a more holistic method which is required by our country and the world to ensure that how knowledge economy is impacting the economic well-being. But the question is, how does it help? See, if a well-defined GDKP model is developed, that will help the government first of all in measuring the level of knowledge impact to the economy. If something is measured, then only it is corrected. So if you can't measure something, you can't correct it. So firstly, we need to measure it. Then we will be taking corrective steps to ensure that the contribution to the knowledge economy, contribution of the knowledge economy to the economy and to the society improves and enhances. So first we'll measure, then we'll boost, and third is policy intervention. So government will be framing policies by getting the data or by understanding the data which it gets from GDKP. So it will help in policy formulation as well. And ultimately, it could build a whole network of investment in knowledge infrastructure, such as research and development, digital connectivity, skill development in our country and abroad as well. But now the question you might ask is, sir, how do we capture knowledge economy in numbers? Isn't knowledge qualitative? How can we make qualitative a subjective thing into an objective thing? How can we make a qualitative concept quantitative? Now my answer to you is that there are certain methods through which knowledge can also be quantified, and the impact of knowledge can also be quantified. So the question is how to capture the impact of knowledge. See, currently if you see the intellectual property rights, they are recorded under the gross fixed capital formation of our country. And gross fixed capital formation refers to the total assets created by the country in one financial year. But alongside this, there can be different satellite accounts which we can create. A satellite account is something, a different account just for a precise separate sector which we create. That is what we call as a satellite account. So discussions are underway for the feasibility of a satellite account for the knowledge economy. Because see, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, they're already having satellite accounts on tourism, on culture, on ocean, on blue economy, and different other things. Again, these are qualitative instruments. These are qualitative things. But still, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has made a proper satellite account on them. So why not on the knowledge economy? At least we should try. So basically, a technical committee in future will be formed to evaluate and guide the proposal as to how we can inculcate this GDKP into our overall GDP framework. Now, this GDKP idea was proposed by Niti Aayog in the year 2021. But at that point of time, National Statistical Committee, they found this idea to be lacking a clear-cut methodology, especially for data collection and for compilation, which is why this could not go forward. But again, recently in 2025, the government has again started the discussion on this, and again the talks in relation to this GDKP has begun. But here let's wait for a moment. We have talked a lot about the GDKP, But the question, which I told you in the introduction part as well, is that why GDP is not a proper measure. See, you must have heard of Professor Amartya Sen, who's a Nobel laureate. Now, Professor Amartya Sen also, while criticizing the GDP as a metric of economic performance, he says that GDP is a flawed measure of measuring economic well-being because it only considers the total market value of goods and services. It neglects the important aspects of human lives, human well-beings, which includes healthcare, which includes education, which includes inequality and environmental sustainability. Essentially, he stated that high GDP does not necessarily mean a high quality of life, or high GDP would not necessarily translate into higher standard of living for the people, the population of that country, which is why he says that GDP is having a very narrow focus and we need to move beyond GDP. And Professor Amartya Sen, alongside his colleagues, he came up with Human Development Index to ensure and to calculate that how much human development is there. And these are having indicators like education, standard of living, healthcare. These are the 3 indicators of Human Development Index, Global Human Development Index, basically to calculate and ensure that are humans really developing or not, or is just the GDP increasing. So that is one alternative which he proposed. Now there are different alternatives proposed by different set of economists as well, and one such proposal was the concept of Green GDP. So many economists, especially environmental economists, they said that GDP is factoring the goods and services, but we are not taking into account the disbenefit, or basically the disadvantageous position of the environment because of increase in GDP. So that means the harm which is being done to the environment because of economic growth. Why are we not factoring in that environmental harm? We should factor in that as well, which is why Green GDP indicator came into force. And Green GDP is an indicator of economic growth with environmental factors taken into consideration along with the standard GDP of the country. So basically the environmental cost of increase in GDP, or the GDP, is taken into account while calculating the GDP. That is what we call as Green GDP. And one byproduct of Green GDP is gross environment product. And it was established back in 1997 by ecological economists like Robert Costanza. And they developed the concept of gross environment product. Now, gross environment product is nothing but the ecosystem value of a particular area. So it is basically the product and service value of an ecosystem which is providing for human welfare, giving a social and economic benefit to humans. So Green GDP is GDP taken into account the environmental cost. Gross environment product, which is a part of Green GDP, refers to the value of the ecosystem, product and service value of the ecosystem to humans. These are 2 things. And if we factor these 2 things, again, we will be able to ensure at least alongside GDP, we are measuring human welfare to an extent as well. And few years back, Uttarakhand government has also said that what they'll be doing is they'll be factoring in the value of their ecosystem by calculating gross environment product for their state also. So it has started to be implemented in India. Like the gross domestic knowledge product, we have also started using gross environmental product as well. Which means that again, we are moving beyond the traditional methods which have been developed by economists. See, economics is not a very old discipline. It's a discipline which is existing just a few centuries old. Which means there is a lot of scope of improvement in economic indicators which has earlier existed. The GDP which we calculate, it's not more than 100 years old. Simon Kuznets was the person who developed the National Income Accounting Standard in 1930s. And after that, this GDP formulation came into play. So there are different other methods as well, different other methods to ensure and measure economic well-being, social well-being of its population. And one such metric or measure is the gross domestic knowledge product, which we just saw, gross environment product, which we saw, gross Green GDP, which we saw, Human Development Index, which we saw, and alongside this, I would like to add one more, that is Gross Happiness Index, which Bhutan follows. That is how much people of the country are happy. So basically the happiness quotient of the people. Doesn't matter whatever is the GDP, the people are not happy, people are depressed, committing suicides, how good that GDP could be. Which is why all these metrics combined will give us a clearer picture about the economic welfare and social welfare of a particular country, of a particular economy. Now, India's move to To explore this GDKP, it reflects the urgent need to move beyond the traditional economic indicators and to move from an economy-driven model or a production-based economic model to knowledge-based economic model. Now, while the challenges will be there in computing it, in customizing it, in measuring the knowledge contributions, different other problems and challenges would be there. But definitely this would be a very good start to something which we were eagerly waiting for. So I hope you gained a new perspective from the session. Do let me know what are your views surrounding this issue in the comment section. All the very best and have a beautiful day. Thank you.